Slide, Understanding the National Disability Insurance Scheme, NDIS. Video series. Video 4, the NDIS Access Process, an AFDO Disability Loop Workshop.
Slide saying Part 2, the NDIS Access Process.
Slide saying who can access the NDIS. Images of a person with a prosthetic arm, passports and a birthday cake. A view of presenters sitting at a table at the front of the room. She reads notes from a braille booklet.
In Part 2, we're looking at the NDIS access process. And of course, we'd like to look at who can access it. There are roughly about 4 million Australians with varying levels of disability or chronic illness, but not everyone will be able to access supports through the NDIS, through a plan. Roughly only about 460,000 people by the time we get to 2020. It's a big difference between 4 million and 460,000. So why the much lower figure? Why much lower than those 4 million people? It's because the NDIS aims to support the people who need it most. And the way that the Act defines who needs it the most is those people with a permanent and significant disability who need assistance with everyday activities. There's that sentence again. Permanent and significant disability who need assistance with everyday activities. As I said, you can access the NDIS through early intervention. You don't have to have, that's a different criteria. So early intervention for adults or children is slightly different. But the early intervention workers can help you with that. Now, does anyone work in or have that, I guess, group of people that they're looking at in terms of 6 years and younger? Okay, because I have some postcards here from one of the early childhood providers who you can take a postcard if you're interested. So everyone goes through the access process before they can get their support, before they can be eligible. But once you're eligible, you can start using your plan. But you have to meet certain criteria before you can access. Now, what do you have to meet? Firstly, you have to have a permanent and significant disability that affects taking part in everyday activities. When I say everyday activities, what are some everyday activities that you all can have? We all get out of bed. Think basic. What are everyday activities?
Going to work.
People go to work. There's a People make breakfast, yes. What about even brushing your teeth? Getting dressed? Showering? I'm not saying them all in the right order, obviously, but what are some other activities? Yeah, there's socialising with colleagues, friends. There's travelling. There's a lot of everyday activities. So that's the first criteria of permanent disability affecting your abilities. The second is that you have to be less than 65 years of age when you first access the scheme. Now, if you access it before 65, once you turn 65, you can choose to stay in the scheme or you can move over to the aged care sector. It doesn't matter. But you have to be under 65 when you first access. And thirdly, you have to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident or a New Zealander that holds a protected special category visa.
Slide saying permanent and significant disability.
Mona, can I ask a question?
Yes.
What was the rationale behind when they set this up? Having 65 as a cut-off for entry into the NDIS?
Your question is about the rationale about having the 65-year cut-off. It's a hot topic and there was a lot of advocacy against it from the disability sector. So I couldn't clearly spell it out, but basically it was that they felt there was a lot of... there's the aged care system, which is being, I guess, revamped as well. And there was the thought that the aged care sector has a lot of provision for disability as well. I won't get into the politics of whether it's a good decision or not, but it was really around that, I guess, blending in or then the transfer over to the aged care system based on age. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. It's a little bit confusing though. It's almost discrimination of people over the age of 65. I've heard that when you turn 65, you actually get bumped off the NDIS. And
no.
Then you have to get picked up by the aged care system. Is that right or not?
It's not correct that you have to leave the NDIS if you're turning 65 and you're already in the scheme. No, you can stay in the NDIS until you're 165 if you're in before your 65th birthday.
So why would anyone opt to go to the aged care system if they were accepted onto the NDIS?
Well, yeah, they would have to. There might be certain, it would just depend on the aged care system and what they offer at that time as to, and you'd have to weigh up your own circumstances. There might be, for some people it may suit them. You know, there may be, I won't say perks, but there might be certain benefits that are in the aged care system that are not in the NDIS. Yeah. You're welcome. So let's look at permanent and significant disability. It's one of the access requirements, as I said, and under the Act, they define this as the person has to have an impairment or a condition that is likely to be permanent, that is lifelong. So I'm totally blind. That's likely to be lifelong. If you break your leg today, not likely to be lifelong. So breaking your leg can be quite severe and it could really impact on you quite significantly, but it's not going to be lifelong. Secondly, the impairment for the person has to substantially reduce their ability to participate effectively in activities of daily life or perform tasks. So once again, if you break your leg, it could really impact on how you get dressed independently. It could impact on how you go to the shops. You may not be able to get to the shops. You may not be able to drive. So that's a significant impairment on those tasks, but it's not lifelong. For me, I, as a blind person, need support to walk down the street with a white cane or a dog or some sort of assistance like that to get around. And that means that I can do those things, but I need the support. So think about how someone does something if they need support to do it. Now, it might be a guide, it might be technology, it might be a verbal prompting. Thirdly, the person's impairment has to affect their capacity to have social and economic participation. Let's talk about social participation. We talked about having friends. What other examples can you think of social participation? Yeah, being a member of a local club, be it a craft club, a football club, a church. They're all social participation, absolutely. Even casting our vote in November in Victoria, that's a form of social participation. What about economic participation? Some examples of economic participation?
Work.
Going to work. Everyone says work, and you're quite right. And that could even be voluntary work, because voluntary work is contributing to the economy. There's something even more basic in economic participation. Paying bills. Someone said paying bills, absolutely. And someone else said, I think Kevin, shopping, yes. Buying that cup of coffee, that's economic participation. These are things that you may take for granted and not really think about if you don't need supports to do those. So if the person's disability affects their ability to do that without support, then that meets that criteria. And the fourth thing is that that person is likely to need those supports for the rest of their life. So if someone needs support because they can't read or write due to maybe an intellectual disability, they're likely to need that support from someone else to read their mail. That might, if that's lifelong, that would fit the criteria. Just like I would likely need a guide dog or a cane for the rest of my life. And fact sheet number 2 in your pack has more information on this. Please do.
I was just wondering when the permanent significant disability, when that applies to a person with a mental health difficulty, and that difficulty is something that's fluctuating, does the Act or the guidelines say anything about when that assessment of it being permanent and significant, when that assessment is to happen?
Sina is asking about and I'm just repeating your question for the video. Sina was asking about the concept of permanent disability impacting when someone has a mental health condition. So it's, I guess we're leading into that now, but it's, yes, it certainly is taken into consideration, but as you would know, there are different levels of mental health impact. So the issue there is looking at the functional impact. So I'll come back to that in a moment.
Slide saying defined programs with an image of a document being signed with a pencil.
Defined programs. So some people are getting support. So people who use a support service already, for example, I use Guide Dogs and I use Vision Australia. I'm using their services already. And so people, you might have heard of ISP, Individual Support Package. That's a system in Victoria. There's other systems around the country. If you're using a service now that has been, say, government funded, then you're using what they call a defined program. If you're in one of those defined programs, then it's really easy for you to meet the access requirements of disability, because you don't need to prove your disability because you're in those schemes already. I wouldn't be going to Guide Dogs if I wasn't blind. So by being virtue of using a defined program, the NDIS are prepared to accept that my disability is there. Now I have to meet the other criteria of age and residency, but being a defined program makes it a bit easier to access the scheme. The other good thing is you don't have to contact the NDIS, they contact you. In my case, they contacted me and said, you know, we have you, you're on the list of defined program recipients. So they write and phone me to invite me to join the scheme. You don't have to, but they come to you. And there's a list of the defined programs on the NDIS website. The NDIS website is www.ndis.gov.au. And their phone number is 1800 800 110. And we'll put that up on the board later. It is also in your handbook. We'll put that up so people can take a look at that. The defined program list is called List C, because there's List A and B as well. So List C is defined programs. But if you're not receiving a program, a support already, that is one of the defined programs, you just need to contact the NDIS and make an access request. And that involves completing some documentation to show that you're eligible for the scheme. And one of those documents is evidence of disability. Now, if you're on the List A conditions, List A is a number of acceptable, I guess, disability conditions. So that might be blindness, for example. So maybe you're not in a defined program, but you've got blindness as an example. So you would be on List A. So that's up on the NDIS website as well. If your condition is on List B, it still means you could be seen as eligible, but it might be that your condition is more variable. And that's where it comes back to something like mental health or autism, for example. There might be different levels of the impact for you from time to time, what they call maybe episodic impact. In that case, you just have to provide a lot more evidence about the functional impact of that disability on your day-to-day life. So it doesn't mean you won't be eligible, it just means you've got to provide more evidence of the impact. So that would be about getting letters from doctors, getting specialists to talk about your mental health condition, for example, and how that impacts you, because mental health, for example, impacts everyone in different ways. Some people it's severe, some people it's not, some people it's a permanent impact even under best treatment, and others it's very rare. So it's more about how it impacts you, and what they tend to say is think of your worst day, not your best day. Your worst day, how does your condition affect you? What do you need to function normally, for want of a better word? And it's all about functional capacity. So what do we mean? What do you think functional capacity means? Functional capacity is what can you do? Can you stand up? Can you cook? Can you go outside? Can you socialise with people? So functional capacity just means what can you do and what can't you do unless you have support. And it's about living an ordinary life. So what impact does your condition have on your ordinary life? Does that answer your question, Sine?
Yes, it does.
Good.
Production of the AFDO Disability Loop, Understanding the NDIS video series has been made possible with funding from the Victorian Government. AFDO would like to thank video participants and those who provided feedback on video drafts for their contributions. Video services, audio description and captioning by Angry Chair. Auslan interpreting by Auslan Services. Remember to visit disabilityloop.org.au.